G'day YouTube. Warbles on the lot here. 11th of January 2026. 2:05 daylight saving time. So that's roughly about 1:05 local mean time. Ventilated, insulated, regulation recording max minimum thermometer hanging up head high under a tree. Says we're on 33 degrees. It's not a dialect, that's the electric thermometer. Although you can get it to look like a dialect if you stand in the right place and squint while holding your mouth right. And the dialect says 35 degrees. Some special effects you really should try them before you commit them to the video, but such is life. What do you reckon? My theory is it's probably going to be more pleasant with the steady breeze, so maybe jump on the motorbike and go for a quiet ride. Have another go at the episode 25 of the Trumpocalypse Chronicles. There's a lot's gone on since New Year's Day, last time I had a go at putting such a video, not only into the camera, but uploading it. So let's try that, eh? And if we set off for deep water on the back road, I'll have to go in economy, which will keep me down to an average speed of 40 kilometres an hour, which will drop the airspeed considerably and hopefully get rid of some of the terrible bloody audio interference that this hypersensitive microphone is otherwise capable of picking up. We shall see what we will see. You are a good boy, aren't you? Wild, unfenced kangaroo. Who likes spiderwheat biscuits as treat food? Somebody has to make sure the animals don't think that all humans are randomly spontaneous murderous assholes. Some of us aren't like that at all. Isn't that right? Hopefully that's going to work. There we go. Camera be rolling. So I thought a trip to deep water might be in order. To generate a slight breeze, at an average of 40 kilometres an hour, so we should get back with 20% or more of the battery after a 60 kilometre ride. And if it looks like I can't do that, well, when we get down to 60% battery capacity remaining, I turn around and come back however close I am to my designated turnaround point, because this thing has no pedals. And that's a nicer sort of a breeze, and that means that with an average of 40 kilometres an hour of road speed, we should get at least 25 kilometres an hour less airspeed, whatever the ambient wind happens to be. because there's no way we'd even get halfway back from deep water if I tried to ride it at 65 kilometres an hour like I do on the highway, and it's when I'm on the highway that I get the most comfort from the extra speed, but it's when the audio gets the most interference from the airspeed. But anyway, I did have a crack at making a Trumpocalypse Chronicle number 25 on New Year's Day, which is 11 days back, 10 days ago. But a funny thing happened while trying to upload it, and you can see that video in the scroll. Thus far, the YouTube app on my mobile phone is only capable of posting comments or asking questions or streaming a short or streaming live. It doesn't have access to the phone's micro SD card and the video memory. Don't know why that is. Might be some random finger trouble by me, but it means that my only way of uploading is via YouTube Studio. And that has the slight penalty of the only way you can review it is with no sound. So I have to review on one phone So that's 44 kilometres an hour on a full battery. And I would say that after doing 75 kilometres, you'd be doing 36 kilometres an hour. So you'd have an average speed of 40 kilometres an hour. Well, at the moment we're seeing 46, so maybe it's 46 and 34. I'm only trying to set out on a 60 kilometre round trip, so I am expecting to get home okay. And like I said, less airspeed, less audio interference, more time to waffle off topic. And the topic of the Trumpocalypse Chronicle is going to be what he's got up to. There's a very brief recap if you're not familiar with the Trumpocalypse Chronicles. Go into my Mad Scientist video scroll or the Pontificating Warble scroll and go back through time to Christmas Day 2024. After Trump had been re-elected, before he'd been inaugurated. I did a 50 kilometre round trip via both different legs of the loop to go to Dundee, more or less squirt up the highway for a kilometre and then come back. If you go back that far in the Trumpocalypse Chronicles and see what I was most afraid of back then and transpose it onto what's happening right now, I didn't anticipate some of the speed and some of the savagery and some of the aimless, directionless trajectories. But I wasn't far wrong. And at this point I don't see how America recovers. It's become kind of ludicrous. The idea that by playing capture the flag with the president of Venezuela, which is what Exit has done. Yeah, they've shot their way in and they've shot their way out and they've taken the president with them and his wife, but they've left the entire regime intact. because of their blockade, the Venezuelans had nowhere to store any oil. They were desperate to sell oil. If you don't keep pumping that stuff, then all the infrastructure for extracting the oil goes bad. Costs a lot of money to get it going again. And at the moment, oil prices are at a kind of a record low, so the idea of suddenly bringing Venezuela's stockpiled oil plus whatever they can pump onto the market, it's not interesting to any of the American oil companies because they're all otherwise having trouble breaking even on the cost of extracting and processing and selling the light sweet crude that they can't use. They want the heavy oil that Venezuela's got. They want the heavy oil that Canada's got. And apparently Trump didn't ever hear about how expensive it is to occupy a third world country where the people hate your guts with a passion and want to blow your stuff up just to see the back of you. So he's discovered, after having trampled all over the United Nations laws and practices regarding territorial sovereignty, diplomatic immunity, basically how to behave properly without pissing yourself in public and shitting the bed at nights. He's very definitely qualified himself as a war criminal, and there's a bunch of people who are making noises about putting international warrants out for his arrest, so if he travels outside the USA, he is entirely likely to be arrested, transported to The Hague and tried as such. It's as if he's dementing and he's losing his grip on reality and on image management. He actually said at a press conference that Congress and the Senate and the Judiciary and the Constitution and the Supreme Court, they are in no way able to limit him and his powers of decision. The only limits on him are his own opinion and his own morality. I don't know how long the American population is going to be prepared to put up with that sort of gangsterism, tyrannical autocracy. But at the moment, they're not quite on the point of an unstoppable public rebellion. For that, you apparently need 3.5% of the population who are out there on the streets openly revolting. So that would require about 12.5 million Americans. I think there was only 5 million at the No King's Day. A big part of the problem is the amount of money that's already gone into arming and upscaling the immigration, customs and enforcement forces. I think it gets 4.5 times more funding than the United States Marine Corps at the moment. And they've lowered their recruiting standards so that basically anybody who's had a control freak fantasy sitting in their basement crying in their beer because they couldn't get into the police force because they're too fat or too corrupt or got too much of a criminal record, they've all been given a $50,000 bonus up front for joining the bloody ICE. And instead of 6 months training, they've had 47 days worth of training, with the number selected because Trump's president number 47. You see, that's all very important, numerologically speaking. Apparently, Trump's decided that the US Navy needs a fleet
of what he persists in calling battleships of the Defiant class, where the USS Trump is going to be #1 of the class. Well, not to put too fine a point on it, that rather defies imagination. It defies logic. I don't think the US Navy has taken delivery of a battleship since about 1943 because they're fucking useless. But Trump's favourite movie about the Navy was made in 1957 or 53 or something, so he thinks battleships are great. They were really useful, he thinks, in the Second World War. Quite what the sudden appearance of the urgent crash building program to produce 25 battleships, ideally by the end of Trump's first term, but if not by 2030. What impact that's going to have on America's ability to produce a fleet of 6 nuclear-powered submarines for Australia to operate side by side with America defending Taiwan against China's desire to reclaim their rebellious province of Formosa. At this point, Australia has not yet formally stated that we're applying to join SAFE, which is sort of like NATO without America. It stands for Safe and Free Europe, which all the other members of NATO, apart from America, have started forming up and allocating budgetary funding for. One of the more perspicacious channels that I watch used to be called Bow of the Fifth Column. I think it probably is still operating under that as a channel name. Discussed the question of, can the United States capture Greenland, and the answer is yes. Take about half a day to actually land enough military force on Greenland to be able to say they captured it. Next question is, could the US hold Greenland? And the answer is probably not, because the celebrated US cold weather fighting force was disbanded in 1966, and it was only reformed in about 2016. So they don't have any continuous hands-on tradition or esprit de corps regimental history of cold weather operations. And all the US bases except for one on Greenland have been not in mothballs but in a decrepit state of disrepair and decay at the mercy of the weather ever since the end of the Cold War. Whereas Germany and France have already offered forces to Denmark to assist in repelling or ousting any American invasion of Greenland. And all those countries that have had armies in Europe for thousands of years, they're pretty good at cold weather operations. Somehow Vietnam, Iraq, twice, Afghanistan, forever, hasn't really prepared America to fight north of the Arctic Circle. So they might have a bloody lot of difficulty in supplying any troops stationed in Greenland, particularly if the 57,000 locals decide that they want to be actively obstructive. Personally, I reckon Australia would be very, very wise to back out of AUKUS, back out of ANZUS, and assure China that we're not stupid enough to want to fight against our biggest trading partner, and hope that after America loses to China, assuming America's even in any position to consider having a fight with China, because the rate at which the USA is polarising and schisming and losing all sense of unity and common purpose, I'm going to be very, very extremely surprised if the United States is a functional political and legal entity in any sort of a sense of being governable by the 4th of July this year. I don't think they're going to make it to the 250th anniversary of the pronouncement of their revolution. And I don't know what kind of a hold, other than using Melania as a puppeteer, the Kremlin's got over Trump, but they have successfully operated him in such ways as he's just destroyed the fabric of United States society and civilization and community. I'm going to be extraordinarily surprised if the mid-term elections happen in a free and fair manner, and even more surprised if there's going to be any sort of election I didn't hear that thing coming at all. Any sort of an election held at the end of 2028 at all, I think Trump will have probably died in office, JD Vance will have taken over and just proclaimed himself dictator for life. Part of the perils of relaxing riding on the back country roads. I wonder if that's the fella whose headlights weren't working just after dark on Friday night when I was coming back from town. A white Trayback 4-wheel drive diesel overtook me. And just as I was about to pull back out into the centre of the road, a 4-wheel drive station wagon, very much that model and very much that colour, went past me with no warning at all, because I didn't see it until it got into my headlights, because the bloody thing had no running lights at all. So it would be kind of funny if the same comedian managed to sneak up behind me while I was talking to the camera today. So the people who have been trying to keep count of how many different places Trumpy wants to have a war with, because he's the peace president who still has his nose out of joint because the Nobel Prize Committee didn't even consider him as a contestant or a candidate. He wants to have a war with Colombia, he wants to annex Canada, he wants to annex Greenland. He's been bombing in Nigeria. He's been bombing in Syria. He's been bombing in Iran. I think he wants Panama to give the canal back as well. And he's offered to start bombing what he calls narco-terrorist drug cartel land bases in Mexico. I don't think he fully appreciates that what he did in Venezuela took 6 months to put together, and that used up a lot of the goodwill and a lot of the operating budget and training and logistical support for the very, very best that the Army, the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines had available. The fact that they got into and out of Venezuela without having helicopters shot down and busloads of people getting injured, that was just bloody good luck. That wasn't, well, I suppose it was good management, but it's a sort of good management you can only do once when you do it by surprise, because nobody expects you to be silly enough to try that. I don't think the Americans would get in and out as easily a second time, and I'll bet just about every other country that's ever had a disagreement with America is on a very much heightened state of alert. Damn, this is a rough mongrel bastard of an excuse for a road. It sure wasn't like this last time I come along here. So quite how long it's going to be before somebody in the excited status decides that they're going to apply their own personal interpretation of the Second Amendment of their Constitution to the spectacle of otherwise unemployable thugs with control freak fantasies acting out all their own self-loathing and hatred by accepting a $50,000 upfront joining bonus to go out and arrest and harass their neighbours. I don't know how long it's going to be before someone starts shooting at the ICE officers. And I don't know how many of the people who are ICE employees will have any actual military or police history, background or training. They strike me as the sort of wannabes who didn't make it through basic training. Whereas a lot of the people who are really pissed off, some of them are veterans of counterinsurgency wars that have been going on for 30 years, 35 years. I wouldn't be at all surprised if some of the serious dyed-in-the-wool defenders of the Constitution don't sort of get together and ambush a mob of those ICE people, rather than singleton lone wolves going out there with a couple of guns and trying to take on half a dozen carloads. You'll get a couple of carloads who are isolated on their own and they'll get cut to pieces by people who know what they're doing. And then it'll be on. Just like it will be if the Minnesota National Guard decides that they're going to get a bit serious about guarding their citizenry from the ICE, who are, from what I can make out, racially profiling all Somalis, because 70 Somalis out of 40,000 Somalis were involved in some kind of a child care scandal, which was cooked up by a red-headed white American woman who's already been to court, found guilty and convicted and sentenced for the fraud. But the fact that some of the people that she was employing in the conduct of the fraud were Somalis is apparently enough for the Ku Klux Klan faction of MAGA. Welcome to the corrugations. There's reasons why I don't go to deep water very often. But if I was to ride at this speed on the highway, I would double the number of close encounters with trucks and grey nomads and Winnebagos and caravans. $18 kilometres. Bit over halfway, I suppose we better keep on going. Not all the road is that bad. And meanwhile, down here in the Antipodes, as the Northern Hemispherians like to call us, in Australia we are now going to have a Federal Royal Commission into why it's already illegal to shoot people who are having a barbecue beside the beach at Bondi on a Sunday afternoon. I don't really know why they want to have a Royal Commission into it. It sort of appears that once you strip away a lot of the racist, alarmist propaganda, you've got a situation where somebody broke up with his missus and became radicalised and then got together with his son to go off and do a whole lot of stupid bullshit. Clearly somebody at ASIO has dropped the ball in that the father of someone who'd come to the attention of ASIO for connections to ISIS 6 years earlier, Daddy was allowed to have a firearm licence, and nobody noticed that within 3 months he'd bought 3 identical fast-firing magazine-fed shotguns. You'd think that would be a bit of a giveaway. But apparently nobody noticed that. And of course the Liberal and National Party professional politicians seem to lose sight of the fact that the father emigrated to Australia under John Howard's watch, and ASIO decided to let the son go free under Morrison's watch. It was under Tony Abbott's watch that the fast-firing shotguns were recategorised by the firearms regulators so that people could have the things for hunting pigs with. And pretty sure it was under Morrison that the shooter's licence was issued to the old bloke too. Like the entire setup for that particular pair to find themselves in a position to be armed and acting murderously beside a beach on a Sunday afternoon, it was all orchestrated by the Liberal Party and the National Party sucking up to the Hunters, Shooters and Fishers Party over the firearms regulations. So then there was a very sudden knee-jerk reaction in terms of firearms regulation. They're now going to say that if you live in a town or a city and you don't actually have land of your own that you've got to do feral animal control on, you're only going to be allowed 4 firearms. If you're a farmer, you'll be allowed 10, and I think that's 10 per address rather than 10 per person at the address. I think if you're a member of a target shooting club in the city, you might be allowed 10, but those 10 might have to live in the armoury of the shooting club, the target shooting club. All this is basically to stop much more upscale versions of what happened. I mean, what happened was one bloke got half a dozen guns and he and his son took 4 of them to a public place and started shooting people. So that's the firearms side of it, and it's the issue of shooting people in a public place. It's always been illegal for Australian citizens to shoot at other citizens. It's illegal for Australian citizens or residents to shoot at citizens or residents or visitors or people on a visa or anything else. There are other places in the world which have different rules, and if you really want the rules of some other place, I urge you to go there. Now, there are people in Australia who've come to Australia because they like Australia and they've decided they want Australia to have the rules that pertain in other places. There are American visitors and there are Australians who wish they had the freedom to own firearms and carry firearms that the Americans have. I say they should go where the laws already suit them rather than try and change the laws here to suit their fantasies. I reckon if everybody who was at that Bondi Festival of the Light barbecue, if they had have been permitted to carry concealed firearms, and if they'd been carrying them at the same rate that Americans carry concealed firearms, then in that 1,000 people, there would have been probably 100 or 200 concealed handguns. So by the time the police showed up, they would have had half a dozen separate and different firefights going on all over the bloody park. As people looked around and saw somebody who looked vaguely Semitic or Levantine in appearance with a gun in their hand, pointing it at somebody else in a different direction. When they showed up, the police would not have known who the bad guys were. There are places in the world where the police routinely carry semi-automatic rifles and submachine guns while going to the bakery to get the sticky buns for morning tea. We were spared that in Australia. They had 16-shot semi-automatic sidearms and body armour and tasers and a radio and a can of mace too, but they didn't have assault rifles and submachine guns. They do have those in Israel. And because there's been a perceived uptick in anti-Semitism in Australia in the last 2 years, and the existence of this perceived uptick has been loudly claimed by the Australian Jewish lobby, who appear to me to be a bunch of politically active Zionists who tend to regard anybody who criticises the Israeli government or the Israeli Defence Forces or the United Nations declared illegal settlers in the Golan Heights and on West Bank. Anybody who criticises anything going on in Israel is immediately claimed and decried and accused of being anti-Semitic, even though whatever they did to raise issues was anti-Zionist. And anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are two completely different things as far as I understand. To begin, everywhere with a Mediterranean shore has been called by various people the Levant. So a Levantine is anybody who comes from anywhere around there. Generally, saying somebody is a Levantine means that they're an Arab, they're not a Jew. The Jews get called Semitic, or they're a Semite. And particularly since 1946, the Levantines and the Semites have not played well together in the sandpit. This is apparently because in the late 1800s it became popular among the Jewish diaspora which run away from the Levant, sort of shortly after the fall of the Roman Empire. Wherever they were experiencing what they described as anti-Semitism, which is a general populist, semi-political movement claiming that whatever your problem was with the economy or anything else, it was all the fault of the Jews. That was called anti-Semitic prejudice. The idea that if you'd had a bad interaction with one Jew, then the next 500 Jews you met were all going to be bad, so therefore you might as well treat them badly on account of what you expected them to do to you. It was sort of the diametrical opposite of the Christian philosophy of do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. But yeah, there's been bad blood between the Christians and the Jews ever since Jesus was nailed up to a cross. And about half that bad blood is because it was Jewish people who asked the Romans to nail Jesus up to the cross, and the other half of that bad relations was because Jesus threw the moneylenders out of the temple, and the Jews said it's okay to charge interest on loans as long as they didn't charge interest to other Jews, because Deuteronomy said no man shall charge interest to their brother. So the Jews figured that other Jews were their brothers and they got interest-free loans, whereas anybody who was not Jewish, they were the goyim. They were non-Jews, they were not of the faith, they were not God's chosen race, so they had to pay interest, not in the brotherhood. And the Christians and the Jews didn't like each other for those particular reasons until Muhammad came along, and he also said God prohibits charging interest on loans or paying interest on loans. And the Christians suddenly decided that they wanted to differentiate themselves from the newfangled Muslims. So they decided that it might be okay to have just a few Jews who were money lenders living on the outskirts of the city, and then the Jewish money lenders had a phenomenally big income and you could charge them a tax because they made a lot of money, and then you'd have a guaranteed income stream to pay for your army and cover all your government bills, and your treasury would have a constant stream of income tax from the rich money lenders. And suddenly European civilization was deficit financed by money lenders who charged interest on all their transactions. So eventually, generally about 200 or 300 years after the Jews showed up in any one country, being refugees, having been chased away from wherever they'd been living for a couple of hundred years, they were welcomed warmly, and after a while they got really rich, and then they become unpopular, and then they run away from that place too. So after the Europeans were really very nasty to the Jews for about 12 years, a period of time which ended in 1945, the rest of Europe said to the survivors of that period of nastiness, the Holocaust, the rest of Europe said to them, look, we understand you won't want to live here among us Europeans after that, because we might suddenly, just at the drop of a hat, turn nasty on you and do something like that again. Surely you'd like to go somewhere else and have a country of your own just for Jews. And the Zionists, who'd been trying to buy blocks of land in Palestine since about the 1880s, they said, yeah, what a good idea, let's go and do that in British mandated Palestine. Hitler had tried to do it, I think, on Mauritius. Somebody wanted it to be happening on the northwest corner of Tasmania, but Palestine got selected, and there appears to be a well-funded, well-organised, well-entrenched lobbying network, propaganda network run out of the Jewish diaspora worldwide, which defends the public image of Israel. No matter what they do, if you criticise it, you're considered to be a terrible anti-Semite. Next thing standing to Hitler, because you said something less than complimentary about the doings of Israel. And here in Australia, not many people in most conversations would have occasion to mention Israel or Palestine or the Middle East, more or less until October the 7th a couple of years ago, when, you know, the hang gliders attacked southern Israel. And my understanding was that 1,250 Jewish people were killed and another 250 were kidnapped, so we got 1,500 all up. And since then, I think the Israeli Defence Forces have killed 67 Palestinians for every Israeli who had a hair harmed on their head on the 7th of October. And a lot of the tactics have been pretty foul, and some of the strategies have been described as war crimes by the people who formally investigate war crimes for a living. It's not just me saying that it's a war crime. And everybody who's pointed that out, specifically including journalists at the ABC, have been targeted by the Australian Jewish lobby. There was an Australian casual journalist who was actually fired. Her contract was terminated because what she said offended the Jewish lobby, and all she said was that the United Nations have described this as a war crime. There was also two incidents. One was kind of a series of incidents. There was an uptick in the amount of SWAT stickers painted on Jewish cemeteries and out the front of synagogues and Jewish schools in Sydney and Melbourne. And it was portrayed in the press as if there'd been a sudden rise in anti-Semitism in Australia, and I couldn't understand it because I hadn't noticed any increase in the number of people saying anti-Semitic things in society as I know it. The people who'd always been anti-Semitic because it was born and bred into them and they were raised that way, they were still anti-Semitic, and the people who'd never been anti-Semitic had not suddenly become anti-Semitic. So I didn't really understand it. And then suddenly, apropos of nothing, it was announced that a caravan had been discovered in Western Sydney full of explosives and anti-Semitic literature. And that didn't sort of ring true, and the police didn't want to admit that it was a terrorist plot. But there was a hell of a backlash by the Jewish lobby in Australian politics, and the National Party and the Liberal Party and the One Nation Party seemed to be attempting to outdo themselves or outdo each other in ventilating their horror stories about how wickedly anti-Semitic Australia's population had been permitted to become under the Labor government. And that all sounded horribly forced and contrived and confected and full of bullshit. And then it transpired that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, operating out of their embassy in Canberra, and the Iranian ambassador has been expelled from the country on this account, they'd been running an operation paying unemployed hobos and no-hopers in Sydney and Melbourne to graffiti Jewish cemeteries and the outskirts of Jewish schools and synagogues. And it was all part of Iran not liking Israel and just deciding to get into a spot of bastardry in Australia because they thought they could get away with it. And there was a hell of a lot of media coverage of the arson attempts, and there was a hell of a lot of media coverage of the SWAT stickers and the cemetery desecrations, and very little coverage of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard connection. And then it turned out that the caravan full of explosives and anti-Jewish pamphlets, that was nothing to do with any organic anti-Semitic uptick in Australia either. What that was a Sydney underworld crime figure who was in trouble for drugs, and I think maybe some murder or attempted murder. He'd been hanging out in the Philippines, and he'd been in the Philippines for long enough to be running out of money. So his idea was to sell information to the Australian police and get his charges against him reduced by basically becoming a stool pigeon. So he had some Confederates put together down to 72%, and I wouldn't mind going into the town of Deepwater, so I think we might turn around. He had some Confederates set up a caravan, and the caravan was duly filled full of explosives and detonators and anti-Jewish pamphlets. And then he offered that information to the Sydney detectives. And that information, or the fact that it existed, was leaked to the media, and the media went ape shit. And the New South Wales government promptly set up all kinds of legislation against hate speech, which has then been struck down by the courts, and now they want to have another set of bloody legislation against hate speech in knee-jerk response against the Bondi thing. And my attitude is it's already illegal to vilify anybody on any basis. You know, you're not allowed to walk up and down the main street and call for somebody else to be discriminated against, or have their property confiscated, or have them assaulted or attacked in any way. I don't see why it should be especially illegal to vilify or denigrate any one particular group. In Australia, we operate on the theory that police are given guns to shoot back at people. They're not given guns so they can point a pistol at you and command you to pick up the paper that they saw you dropping. It's a progression down a bad track, it seems to me, to have the police suddenly start showing up at any kind of crowd gathering in the towns and the cities with semi-automatic assault rifles and submachine guns, because they're afraid that somebody might show up using weapons that have appeared at Bondi, and they were a problem in the sense that they were long arms versus pistols, but on another sense, I don't know that they were rifles. I think they were shotguns firing solid slugs. So it wasn't quite as unfair an advantage. You know, if somebody's got a semi-automatic 9mm pistol with 17 rounds in the magazine, and if they know what they're doing, well, the police did shoot both of the bad guys, and they shot them with pistols, regardless of the bad guys having long arms. I sort of rest my case. But yeah, it's already illegal to vilify people, it's already illegal to shoot people. I don't think we need much in the way of stricter laws against hate speech. I'm very sure we don't need any special hate speech laws protecting any one group. It shouldn't be 3 times the penalty to badmouth the Californians as to badmouth anybody else. And I think somebody should start a sweepstake on whether America's going to be an actual union of states come the 4th of July, because I don't see enough coherence in their society. Welcome to deep water. Right, so that was a 34 kilometre ride. 69.93 on the odometer. 59 minutes. Average speed 35. Maximum speed 61. I do not recall 61. Oh, maybe. Maybe, perhaps. Computer says so, so it probably happened. So yeah, all of the bad things I was afraid of have happened, or even worse shit's gone on as regards the US. So anyway, to my American viewers, keep your heads down. If trouble starts, be somewhere else, because most of the people are going to be very stirred up. And I have no idea how a good outcome is going to be brought about by all of the cantankerousness. But 80 million Americans voted to have no government. 79 million voted to have Trump run the show. They voted for this. They voted for this. Warbles on lot to YouTube. Ciao.